My name is Elijah Thorne, and I'm 38 years old. Asheville, North Carolina is my home, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place I always thought I'd share with Sarah. I'm a carpenter, a craftsman, really. I build things, solid things, things that last. I take pride in my work, in the way a well-placed nail can hold together a house, a life, a future. Sarah, well, she was a dreamer, an artist full of vibrant colors and boundless energy. She saw the world in a way I never could, and I loved her for it. We were a team, the grounded builder and the free-spirited artist, a perfect balance, or so I thought. We had a plan, a dream we were building together. I'd work, save, and she'd paint, inspire. Eventually, we'd build our own place, a haven where her art could flourish and my craftsmanship could shine. We even found the perfect plot of land just outside of town, with views that stretched forever. Sarah would spend hours there, sketching and dreaming, while I envisioned the house we'd build, the life we'd create. Then came Mark, a local gallery owner, sophisticated, charming, everything I wasn't. He started showing interest in Sarah's work, praising her talent, offering opportunities. I was happy for her, proud of her success. But slowly, subtly, things began to change. Late nights at the gallery, weekend trips to art shows, hushed phone calls. I tried to ignore it, to trust her, but the unease grew, a knot tightening in my stomach. One evening I came home early from a job, eager to surprise her with dinner. The house was silent, the air thick with unspoken words. I found her in the living room, a letter clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face. It was over, she said. She was leaving me. For Mark. He understood her, appreciated her art, supported her dreams. I was too practical, too grounded, too boring. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. The future we had planned, the house we were going to build, all of it shattered in an instant. She packed her bags that night, taking with her not only her belongings but also a piece of my heart. As she walked out the door, she said, "I'm sorry, Elijah, but I need this. I need him. He's offering me a life I could only dream of." I stood there, numb, watching her go, the silence of the house amplifying the deafening roar in my ears. The next few months were a blur of pain and disbelief. I threw myself into my work, building houses for other people, while my own life crumbled around me. Sleep offered no escape, haunted by memories of Sarah, of her laughter, her touch, her betrayal. I drank too much, ate too little, and pushed away anyone who tried to help. Our friends tried to console me, but their words felt hollow, empty platitudes that offered no comfort. I was alone, adrift in a sea of despair, with no land in sight. But amidst the pain, a flicker of something else began to ignite: anger. Not the explosive, destructive kind, but a slow-burning, quiet rage. A determination to not let her define me, to not let her ruin my life. I started going to the gym, working out until my muscles screamed, channeling my pain into physical strength. I focused on my business, taking on more projects, honing my skills, proving to myself that I was more than just the guy who got dumped. And I started to formulate a plan that would not only heal my wounded pride but also deliver a subtle, yet devastating, blow to Sarah and her new life. The plan started with saving every penny I could, working day and night. I denied myself everything, sacrificing comfort and leisure for the sake of my goal. I knew it would take time, but I was patient, fueled by a burning desire to turn the tables. I discovered that Mark, despite his sophisticated facade, was drowning in debt, his gallery teetering on the brink of collapse. He had taken out a massive loan to buy a new property, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, a showpiece for his success, and more importantly, a symbol of his love for Sarah. It was the house she had always dreamed of, a place where she could finally create her art without limitations. And that's when the idea struck me, a daring, audacious plan that would require all my skill, patience, and cunning. I was going to buy the house Mark was building for Sarah. I started discreetly investigating the property, learning everything I could about the mortgage, the contractors, the projected value. I knew it was a risky move, a gamble that could either make me a hero or break me completely. But the thought of Sarah's face when she realized what I had done was enough to keep me going. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Mark's gallery finally succumbed to its financial woes, forcing him to default on the loan. The bank, eager to recoup its losses, put the property up for auction. It was my chance. I gathered every last dollar I had, mortgaged my own property, and borrowed from friends and family. It was a huge risk, but I was determined to win. The auction was a tense affair, filled with wealthy investors and shrewd businessmen. I kept my cool, bidding strategically, never revealing my true intentions. The price climbed higher and higher, but I held my ground, refusing to be outbid. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the gavel came down. I had won. I was the owner of the house Mark was building for Sarah. The feeling was surreal, a mix of triumph and disbelief. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life, turned the tables on Sarah, and achieved the impossible. I savored the moment, letting the weight of my accomplishment wash over me. But the real satisfaction was yet to come. I knew that simply owning the house wouldn't be enough. I needed to make sure Sarah knew who had bought it, to let her see the consequences of her choices. I decided to wait, to let her settle into her new life with Mark, to let her believe that she had finally found happiness. Then, at the perfect moment, I would reveal my secret, shattering her illusion of perfection. The waiting was excruciating, but I remained patient, biding my time, watching from afar as Sarah and Mark built their life together in the house that was now mine. They threw lavish parties, hosted art shows, and filled the house with laughter and music. On the surface, they seemed happy, successful, and in love. But I knew the truth. I knew that Mark was still struggling financially, that their relationship was strained by his debts, and that Sarah was starting to question her decision to leave me. One evening, I received a call from a mutual friend, informing me that Sarah and Mark were hosting a grand opening for Mark's newly renovated gallery. It was the perfect opportunity. I knew that Sarah would be there, eager to show off her success and bask in the attention of the art world. I decided to make an appearance, not as the jilted ex-boyfriend, but as the wealthy new owner of her dream house. I put on my best suit, drove to the gallery, and walked in with my head held high, exuding confidence and success. Sarah saw me the moment I walked in, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. She tried to play it cool, to pretend that my presence didn't bother her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I walked over to her, extended my hand, and said, "Sarah, it's been a while. You look well." She forced a smile and replied, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" "Just admiring the art," I said, "and congratulating Mark on his new gallery. It's quite impressive." Mark, sensing the tension between us, stepped in and said, "Elijah, good to see you. I didn't know you were an art enthusiast." "I'm not," I said, "but I do appreciate beautiful things, especially houses. Speaking of which, Sarah, I wanted to congratulate you on finding such a wonderful place to live. That estate on the outskirts of town is truly magnificent." Her face paled and she stammered, How did you know about that?" "Oh, I know everything about that house," I said, "because I own it." The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone stopped talking, their eyes glued to Sarah, Mark, and me. Sarah's face crumpled and tears began to stream down her cheeks. Mark's face was a mask of fury, his fists clenched at his sides. "You what?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I bought the house, Sarah," I said, "the house you left me for. The house you always dreamed of. It's mine now." The satisfaction I felt was overwhelming, a sense of vindication that washed away years of pain and anger. I had finally gotten my revenge, not by hurting Sarah, but by taking back control of my life and achieving something she never thought possible. I turned and walked out of the gallery, leaving Sarah and Mark to deal with the fallout of my revelation. As I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. I had won, but the victory felt hollow, empty. As I sat in the silence of the house that was now mine, the house that was supposed to be ours, I realized that I had achieved my revenge, but I was still alone. Was this triumph worth the emptiness I felt? I spent the next few weeks renovating the house, turning it into the home I had always envisioned. I used my skills as a carpenter to create beautiful, functional spaces, filling the rooms with handcrafted furniture and original artwork. I even built a separate studio for Sarah, hoping that one day she might come back and use it. But she didn't. She stayed with Mark, clinging to the illusion of happiness, even as their relationship continued to crumble. I heard through mutual friends that she was miserable, that she regretted her decision to leave me, but she was too proud to admit it. I tried to move on, to find someone new, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still living in Sarah's shadow. Every woman I met was compared to her. Every relationship fell short of the love we had once shared. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake, if my revenge had cost me more than it was worth. One day, I received a letter from Sarah. It was a simple, handwritten note filled with apologies and regrets. She admitted that she had made a terrible mistake, that she had been blinded by Mark's wealth and charm, and that she had never stopped loving me. She asked if there was any chance we could start over, if I could ever forgive her. My heart ached as I read her words. I knew that she was sincere, that she truly regretted her actions, but I also knew that I could never fully trust her again. The pain of her betrayal was too deep, the scars too raw. I wrote her back, thanking her for her honesty and wishing her well. I told her that I had forgiven her, but that I couldn't go back to the way things were. It was over. I had finally let her go. A few months later, I received another letter, this time from Mark. He was desperate. His gallery had closed, his debts were mounting, and he was facing financial ruin. He begged me to sell him the house, offering me a ridiculously low price. I considered his offer, tempted to extract one last bit of revenge, to watch him squirm in his desperation. But then I realized that it wouldn't bring me any satisfaction. It would only prolong the cycle of pain and resentment. I decided to do something unexpected, something that would not only help Mark but also free myself from the burden of my past. I offered to lease the house to him and Sarah at a very low rent, with an option to buy it back at a fair price once they were back on their feet. I told him that I wanted them to have a chance to rebuild their lives, to find happiness again. Mark was stunned, speechless. He thanked me profusely, promising to repay my kindness. Sarah called me later that day, her voice filled with gratitude. She told me that she and Mark had decided to start over, to focus on their relationship and their art, and to leave behind the mistakes of the past. I wished her well, feeling a sense of peace and closure that I hadn't felt in years. I realized that true revenge wasn't about inflicting pain on others, but about freeing yourself from the shackles of anger and resentment. It was about choosing forgiveness over bitterness, and about finding happiness in your own life, regardless of what others had done to you. I moved back to my old house, the smaller, simpler place where I had started my life. I continued to work as a carpenter, building houses for other people, but now I also focused on building my own happiness. I started dating again, met some wonderful women, and eventually found someone who loved me for who I was, not for who I could be. I learned to trust again, to open my heart to new possibilities, and to embrace the future with optimism and hope. Years later, I received a wedding invitation from Sarah and Mark. They had rebuilt their lives, found success in their careers, and were finally getting married. I attended their wedding, wishing them all the best. As I watched them exchange vows, I realized that I had finally moved on. I had forgiven Sarah, I had forgiven Mark, and most importantly, I had forgiven myself. The house that had once been a symbol of betrayal and revenge had become a symbol of forgiveness and redemption. It was now their home, a place where they could build a new life together, free from the shadows of the past. And I was free too, free to love, free to live, and free to finally be happy. But then, years later, a quiet whisper of truth surfaced at a local art fair. A disgruntled former employee of Mark's gallery, fueled by cheap wine and a desire to stir the pot, casually mentioned to me that Mark had known about the auction all along. He deliberately defaulted on the loan, knowing I would swoop in to buy the house. It was all a meticulously crafted scheme, a twisted game of emotional manipulation designed to bleed me dry. Sarah was in on it too, her apologies, her tears, all an act to ensure I'd offer them the lease and the option to buy. They'd played me like a fiddle, not for revenge, but for cold, hard cash. The house was never their dream, it was always their con. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The peace I had painstakingly cultivated shattered into a million pieces, replaced by a burning rage that threatened to consume me. The forgiveness, the closure, all a carefully constructed lie. They hadn't changed, they hadn't learned, they had simply perfected their deception. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated, malicious act of manipulation that had spanned years, robbing me of my money, my time, and my emotional well-being. The old Elijah, the one driven by anger and revenge, resurfaced stronger and more determined than ever. This time, however, I wouldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I wouldn't act impulsively or recklessly. I would plan, I would strategize, and I would deliver a blow so devastating that they would never recover. I started by gathering evidence, meticulously documenting every aspect of their scheme. I spoke to former employees, tracked financial transactions, and pieced together the puzzle of their deceit. The more I learned, the angrier I became, but I kept my cool, knowing that patience was my greatest weapon. I discovered that Mark and Sarah were planning to sell the house, pocket the profits, and move to Europe, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unpaid debts. They were about to get away with it to escape the consequences of their actions. But I wouldn't let them. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, ruthless woman who specialized in fraud and deception. I presented her with my evidence, and she was impressed by the thoroughness of my investigation. She agreed to take my case, promising to fight for me with everything she had. We decided to let them proceed with their plan to sell the house, lulling them into a false sense of security. Then at the last possible moment we would strike. The day of the closing arrived, a bright, sunny morning that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. Mark and Sarah were beaming, their eyes filled with dollar signs. They signed the papers, received the check, and congratulated themselves on their success. As they were leaving the closing, my lawyer stepped in, accompanied by two police officers. She presented them with a warrant for their arrest, charging them with fraud, conspiracy, and a host of other crimes. Mark and Sarah were stunned, their faces turning ashen. They tried to deny the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. They were handcuffed and taken into custody, their dreams of escaping to Europe shattered in an instant. The news of their arrest spread like wildfire, shocking the art community and tarnishing their reputation beyond repair. Their carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the greedy, manipulative individuals they truly were. But my revenge didn't stop there. I filed a civil lawsuit against them, seeking damages for the financial and emotional distress they had caused me. The lawsuit dragged on for months, but eventually I won. The judge ordered Mark and Sarah to pay me a substantial sum of money, enough to cover my legal fees, my emotional damages, and the profits they had made from their scheme. They were financially ruined, their assets seized, their dreams shattered. They were forced to sell the house, the very house that had been the centerpiece of their deception. And this time, I didn't offer them a lease or an option to buy. I sold it to a young family, a couple with two small children who were eager to start a new life in the mountains. I knew that they would cherish the house, filling it with love and laughter, erasing the stain of Mark and Sarah's betrayal. With the money I recovered from the lawsuit, I started a foundation to help victims of fraud and deception. I wanted to use my experience to help others avoid the pain and suffering I had endured. I became an advocate for justice, speaking out against those who prey on the vulnerable and fighting for the rights of those who have been wronged. As for Mark and Sarah, they disappeared from the art scene, their names whispered in hushed tones, their careers in ruins. They had learned a valuable lesson, a lesson about the consequences of greed and deception. They had underestimated me, thinking that I was a naive, gullible fool who could be easily manipulated. But they were wrong. I was stronger, smarter, and more determined than they ever imagined. And in the end, I had gotten my revenge, not by stooping to their level, but by exposing their lies and bringing them to justice. The feeling of vindication was immense, a sense of closure that finally allowed me to move on with my life. I had faced my demons, overcome my challenges, and emerged stronger and wiser than before. I had learned that true revenge wasn't about inflicting pain on others, but about protecting yourself, fighting for justice, and building a better future. And as I looked out at the mountains that surrounded my home, I knew that I had finally found peace. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have foreseen, was that this was just the beginning of a much larger, more complex game. The art world, it turned out, was a tangled web of secrets, lies, and hidden agendas, and I had only scratched the surface. My quest for justice had inadvertently drawn me into a world of intrigue and danger, a world where nothing was as it seemed and everyone had something to hide. And as I would soon discover, Mark and Sarah were just pawns in a much larger game, a game that had been played for years, with stakes far higher than I could ever have imagined. The real players were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike, and I unwittingly had become their target. The first sign came subtly, a misplaced brushstroke on a painting I'd commissioned from a young, promising artist. It was a portrait of my late mother, a piece meant to honor her memory. The artist, a timid soul named Emily, swore she hadn't made the mistake. It was as if the painting itself had been altered after it left her studio. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to stress or a trick of the light. But then came the anonymous phone calls, whispers in the dead of night, just static and heavy breathing on the other end. They were unnerving, unsettling, but offered no tangible threat. I installed a security system, upgraded the locks, trying to reassure myself it was just paranoia. Then one morning I woke to find my workshop ransacked, tools scattered, half-finished projects destroyed. Nothing was stolen, only vandalized, a clear message that this wasn't about robbery. It was personal. The police investigation stalled, offering no leads, no suspects. I was on my own, a chilling realization that fueled my growing unease. I started digging, revisiting the evidence I had gathered against Mark and Sarah, searching for any connection, any hint of who might be behind these new attacks. I pored over their financial records, their phone logs, their emails, anything that might shed light on their hidden lives. And that's when I found it, a series of encrypted messages exchanged between Mark and an unknown individual, messages that hinted at a secret society, a clandestine group of art collectors and dealers with a penchant for manipulation and control. The messages spoke of debts, obligations, and a master plan that involved more than just defrauding me. I knew then that I was in over my head, that I had stumbled upon something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I needed help, someone with the skills and resources to unravel this web of deceit. I reached out to an old friend, a former intelligence operative named Jake, a man with a knack for finding the truth, no matter how deeply buried. Jake listened to my story with a grim expression, his eyes narrowing as I described the encrypted messages and the mysterious organization. He agreed to help, warning me that this could be a dangerous path, one that could lead me into the heart of darkness. Together, we began to investigate, following the trail of cryptic clues left behind by Mark and his shadowy associates. We discovered that the secret society was known as the Collectors, a group of wealthy and powerful individuals who used their influence to manipulate the art market, control artists, and acquire priceless artifacts through any means necessary. Mark and Sarah had been indebted to the Collectors, owing them a large sum of money they had used to finance their gallery. Their scheme to defraud me had been a way to pay off their debt, but it had failed, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. The Collectors, angered by their failure, had decided to silence them, eliminating any potential threat to their organization. The attacks on me were a warning, a message that I should back off, that I was playing a game I didn't understand. But I refused to be intimidated. I was determined to expose the Collectors and bring them to justice, no matter the cost. With Jake's help, I infiltrated their inner circle, posing as a wealthy art collector eager to join their ranks. I attended secret meetings, participated in clandestine auctions, and slowly gained their trust. I learned about their illegal activities, their ruthless tactics, and their ultimate goal: to control the world's most valuable art and use it to manipulate global events. As I delved deeper into their world, I realized that I was in grave danger. The Collectors were suspicious of me, constantly testing my loyalty, watching my every move. I knew that one wrong step could expose me and cost me my life. But I pressed on, driven by a burning desire to avenge Mark and Sarah, to expose the Collectors, and to protect the world from their insidious influence. The climax of my mission came at a lavish gala hosted by the Collectors at a secluded estate in the mountains. The gala was a celebration of their power and wealth, a gathering of the world's elite, all complicit in their nefarious activities. I used the opportunity to gather evidence, recording conversations, photographing documents, and collecting information that would expose their crimes. But as I was about to leave, I was discovered. The collectors surrounded me, their faces filled with menace. They knew that I was a spy, that I had infiltrated their organization and was about to expose them to the world. They dragged me into a hidden chamber, a room filled with priceless artifacts and state-of-the-art torture equipment. They threatened me, demanding that I reveal my sources and abandon my quest for justice. But I refused to break. I knew that my life was on the line, but I couldn't betray my principles. I fought back, using my wits and my skills to evade their grasp. I managed to escape the chamber and alert the authorities, triggering a raid on the estate that resulted in the arrest of the collectors and the seizure of their ill-gotten gains. The world was shocked by the revelations of their crimes, and the art world was turned upside down. Mark and Sarah were exonerated, their names cleared, and they were released from prison. They thanked me for my courage and my dedication to justice, but they knew that they could never repay me for what I had done. As for me, I returned to my quiet life in Asheville, leaving behind the world of intrigue and danger. But I knew that I would never forget what I had learned, that the fight for justice was a never-ending battle, and that I would always be ready to defend the truth, no matter the cost. And so, the story of my revenge came to an end, but the story of my life continued, filled with purpose, meaning, and a renewed sense of hope. The mountains of Asheville once again offered solace, the craftsmanship a grounding force, and the memory of Sarah, no longer a source of pain, but a reminder of the complexities of the human heart and the enduring power of forgiveness. The final brushstroke on my own canvas, a life rebuilt, not on revenge, but on resilience. But the peace that Elijah Thorne had found in Asheville, nestled amongst the familiar scent of sawdust and pine, proved to be as fragile as a poorly glued joint. He was, after all, a carpenter, not a detective, and the art world's shadows stretched far beyond his understanding. Though he'd helped bring down a corrupt organization, the ripples of their actions were far from settled. Elijah found himself caught in a web of uncertainty. Emily Carter, the artist who painted his mother's portrait, became increasingly withdrawn and fearful. She avoided Elijah, canceling their scheduled meetings to discuss future projects. When he finally managed to reach her, her voice was barely a whisper, filled with a terror that chilled him to the bone. "They warned me," she stammered. "They said if I spoke to you again, they'd ruin me." Emily refused to elaborate, cutting the call short and disappearing from Asheville altogether. Elijah felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The collectors might be behind bars, but their influence clearly extended beyond the prison walls. Someone was still pulling the strings, someone who wanted to keep him silent. He tried contacting Jake, but his friend had vanished, leaving no trace. His phone was disconnected, his apartment empty. It was as if he had never existed. Elijah was alone again, facing an invisible enemy with unknown motives. He started noticing subtle signs of surveillance. A black car parked across the street, a figure lurking in the shadows, his mail tampered with. He felt like he was being watched, that his every move was being scrutinized. He tried to ignore it to focus on his work, but the feeling of paranoia grew stronger with each passing day. He began to question everything, to suspect everyone. Was his new girlfriend, Sarah Jenkins, also part of the conspiracy? Was his friendly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, secretly an informant? He knew it was irrational, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was surrounded by enemies. One evening, while working late in his workshop, Elijah heard a noise outside. He grabbed a hammer and cautiously opened the door. A package lay on the doorstep, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. There was no return address. He hesitated, a sense of foreboding washing over him. He took the package inside and carefully unwrapped it. Inside, he found a single object, a small, antique music box. It was beautifully crafted, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and adorned with intricate carvings. He opened the lid and a haunting melody filled the room. It was a tune he had never heard before, yet it sounded strangely familiar. As the music played, he noticed a small inscription on the inside of the lid. "The past is never truly buried." A chill ran down his spine. He slammed the lid shut, cutting off the music. He knew that this wasn't just a random gift. It was a message, a warning from someone who knew his past, someone who knew about Sarah, about Mark, about the collectors. Someone who was about to make his life a living hell. He decided to consult with the lawyer that had helped with Mark and Sarah. Elijah walked into the law office of Ms. Abigail Hayes. Her office was cool and dark, a refuge from the Asheville summer heat. Abigail, a woman who exuded both intelligence and a no-nonsense attitude, listened intently as Elijah recounted the recent events. The music box, the disappearances, the feeling of being watched. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowed in thought. "This sounds like more than just paranoia, Elijah," she said. "Someone is definitely trying to intimidate you. The question is, why?" Abigail agreed to investigate, using her contacts in law enforcement and the intelligence community to gather information about the collectors and their remaining associates. She warned Elijah to be careful, to avoid taking any unnecessary risks. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Elijah," she said. "These people are dangerous and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens them." Elijah took her advice to heart, but he refused to be cowed. He was a carpenter, a builder, not a victim. He wouldn't let these people scare him into hiding. He decided to take the fight to them. He started by retracing Jake's steps, visiting the places he had frequented, talking to the people he had known. He learned that Jake had been investigating a new lead, a rumor about a secret auction of stolen artwork in Europe. He had been planning to travel to Paris to gather evidence, but he had disappeared before he could make the trip. Elijah suspected that the collectors were involved in Jake's disappearance. They had likely learned about his investigation and silenced him before he could expose their operation. He decided to travel to Paris himself, to pick up where Jake had left off. He knew it was a risky move, but he felt compelled to find out the truth, to avenge his friend and to bring the collectors to justice. He booked a flight to Paris, leaving Sarah Jenkins in charge of his business. He didn't tell her the full story, fearing for her safety. He simply said that he needed to take a trip to clear his head. As he boarded the plane, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. But he was determined to see this through, to confront his enemies and to reclaim his life. His plane ticket was on his pocket. Arriving in Paris, Elijah immediately felt out of his element. The city was a whirlwind of activity, a maze of narrow streets and grand boulevards. He spoke little French and had no contacts in the city. He felt lost and alone, but he refused to be discouraged. He started by visiting the art galleries and auction houses that Jake had been investigating. He showed them Jake's picture, asking if anyone had seen him. Most people were unhelpful, but a few recognized Jake and offered him cryptic clues. He learned that Jake had been asking about a painting, a masterpiece by a famous artist that had been stolen from a museum years ago. The painting was rumored to be in the possession of the collectors, who were planning to sell it at a secret auction. Elijah suspected that Jake had been trying to locate the painting, to use it as evidence against the collectors. He decided to follow Jake's lead, to track down the painting and expose the collector's operation. He spent days scouring the city, visiting antique shops, flea markets, and underground art galleries. He met with shady characters, art thieves, and black market dealers, all in the hope of finding a clue. He learned that the painting was being held in a secure vault beneath a bank in the city center. The vault was heavily guarded, protected by state-of-the-art security systems. It seemed impossible to penetrate, but Elijah refused to give up. He knew that he had to find a way to get inside, to retrieve the painting, and to bring the collectors to justice. He made a friend with a waitress named Myril, who was intrigued by his quest. But he had no idea what was coming next. Myril, a young woman with fiery red hair and a sharp wit, offered Elijah a glimmer of hope in the Parisian underworld. She worked at a small cafe near the bank, and she had overheard rumors about the vault. She told Elijah that the bank was owned by a wealthy and influential family with ties to the collectors. She also told him about a former bank employee who had been fired for stealing money. The employee, a disgruntled man named Jean-Pierre, knew the layout of the bank and the security codes for the vault. Myril offered to introduce Elijah to Jean-Pierre, believing that he might be able to help him. Elijah was hesitant at first, unsure if he could trust Jean-Pierre. But he was running out of options, and he knew that he needed to take a risk. He met with Jean-Pierre at a seedy bar on the outskirts of the city. Jean-Pierre was a bitter and resentful man, consumed by a desire for revenge. He agreed to help Elijah infiltrate the bank, but he demanded a large sum of money in return. Elijah didn't have that kind of money, but he offered Jean-Pierre a share of the proceeds from the sale of the stolen painting. Jean-Pierre agreed to the deal, and they began to plan their heist. They spent weeks studying the bank's blueprints, analyzing the security systems, and practicing their entry and exit strategies. They learned that the vault was protected by a laser grid, motion sensors, and pressure plates. They needed to find a way to disable these systems or bypass them altogether. Jean-Pierre revealed that he had a contact inside the bank, a security guard who was sympathetic to his cause. The guard, a quiet and unassuming man named Alain, was willing to help them disable the security systems for a short period of time. Alain warned them that the bank was heavily guarded and that they would only have a few minutes to get in and out. He also told them that the collectors were aware of their plan and were waiting for them inside the vault. Elijah and Jean-Pierre knew that they were walking into a trap, but they were determined to proceed. They had come too far to turn back now. On the night of the heist, Elijah and Jean-Pierre met Alain at a prearranged location near the bank. Alain gave them a key card that would disable the security systems for 5 minutes. He warned them to be quick and careful, and then he disappeared into the night. Elijah and Jean-Pierre approached the bank cautiously, their hearts pounding in their chests. They used the key card to disable the security systems and slipped inside. The bank was dark and silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock. They made their way to the vault, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. As they reached the vault door, they saw a group of armed men waiting for them. The collectors had been expecting them all along. A firefight erupted, bullets flying through the air. Elijah and Jean-Pierre were outnumbered, but they fought bravely, using their skills and their wits to defend themselves. Jean-Pierre was hit, falling to the ground in agony. Elijah knew that he had to protect him to get him out of there alive. He grabbed the stolen painting and made a run for it, dodging bullets and leaping over obstacles. He managed to escape the bank, leaving Jean-Pierre behind. He knew that he had betrayed his friend, but he had no choice. He had to get the painting to the authorities, to expose the collectors and bring them to justice. But he knew that the collectors wouldn't let him get away with it. They would hunt him down, and they would stop at nothing to silence him. He ran through the streets of Paris, desperate to find a safe place to hide. He knew he couldn't trust anyone, not even Myrill. He was alone, hunted, and running out of time. But then, in a desperate attempt, he called Abigail Hayes, hoping she could help. Abigail Hayes, despite being thousands of miles away in Asheville, proved to be Elijah's lifeline. He managed to get a brief, frantic call through to her, explaining the situation and his location. Abigail, ever resourceful, contacted her contacts in Interpol, alerting them to Elijah's situation and the stolen painting. She also provided them with the information he had gathered about the collectors, including their identities and their network of criminal activities. Interpol agents quickly mobilized, converging on Paris to assist Elijah, but the collectors were one step ahead. They had tracked Elijah to a rundown hotel on the outskirts of the city. They surrounded the building, trapping him inside. Elijah knew that he was outnumbered and outgunned, but he refused to surrender. He barricaded himself in his room and prepared to fight to the death. A fierce gun battle ensued, bullets shattering windows and tearing through walls. Elijah fought bravely, using his carpentry skills to create makeshift weapons and traps. He managed to hold off the collectors for a while, but they eventually breached his defenses. They stormed into his room, their guns blazing. Elijah was hit, falling to the ground, bleeding. He thought that this was the end, that he was about to die. But then the Interpol agents arrived. They stormed the hotel, engaging the collectors in a fierce firefight. The collectors were overwhelmed and quickly subdued. Elijah was rescued, pulled from the wreckage of his hotel room. He was rushed to a hospital where he underwent surgery to remove the bullets from his body. He was lucky to be alive. While Elijah recovered in the hospital, Interpol agents raided the bank vault, seizing the stolen painting and arresting several members of the collectors. The organization was finally dismantled, their reign of terror brought to an end. Jean-Pierre was also rescued, and he was given medical treatment for his injuries. He was grateful to Elijah for saving his life, and he agreed to testify against the collectors in court. Myriel visited Elijah in the hospital, her eyes filled with tears. She apologized for putting him in danger, but Elijah assured her that it wasn't her fault. He thanked her for her help and for her friendship. As Elijah recuperated, he reflected on the events that had led him to this point. He had sought revenge on Sarah and Mark, but his actions had inadvertently drawn him into a much larger conflict. He had faced danger, betrayal, and near-death experiences, but he had also found courage, loyalty, and a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that revenge was a destructive force, that it could consume you and lead you down a dark path. He decided to abandon his quest for revenge and focus on building a better future, one based on justice, compassion, and forgiveness. Once Elijah recovered, he returned to Asheville, a changed man. He was no longer driven by anger and resentment, but by a desire to make a positive impact on the world. The pieces of his broken past, it seemed, were finally beginning to mend. Abigail Hayes greeted him with a knowing smile. She'd seen this change in him. This was going to be what defined him. But back in Asheville, Elijah was about to discover that even though the main threat was gone, the tendrils of the darkness had reached further than he could have possibly imagined. Life in Asheville settled into a rhythm, but Elijah found it hard to shake the feeling of being watched, a shadow lingering just beyond the edge of his vision. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in the familiar act of shaping wood, creating something beautiful and lasting. Sarah Jenkins, sensing his unease, offered unwavering support, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm of his memories. He was cautious about starting any relationship because of Sarah and Mark. One afternoon, while working on a custom cabinet for a local gallery, Elijah noticed a familiar symbol etched into the wood grain. It was a small, stylized eye, the calling card of the collectors. He froze, his blood turning to ice. He had thought that he had destroyed the collectors, but they were clearly still active, operating in the shadows. He examined the wood more closely, realizing that it had been treated with a special chemical that would slowly poison anyone who handled it. The cabinet was destined for the gallery owned by Arthur Finch, a wealthy art collector with a reputation for being eccentric and reclusive. Elijah suspected that Finch was a member of the collectors, and that the poisoned cabinet was intended for a rival collector. He decided to warn Finch, but he knew that he couldn't trust anyone. He couldn't go to the police as they might be compromised. He couldn't even trust Abigail Hayes as she might be under surveillance. He was on his own again, facing a deadly threat with no one to turn to. He carefully removed the poisoned wood from the cabinet, replacing it with a non-toxic alternative. He then delivered the cabinet to Finch's gallery, acting as if nothing was wrong. He observed Finch closely, trying to discern his true motives. Finch was polite and appreciative, but Elijah sensed a coldness in his eyes, a hint of something sinister lurking beneath the surface. As Elijah was leaving the gallery, he noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Emily Carter, the artist who had painted his mother's portrait. She looked pale and frightened, and she quickly disappeared into the crowd before he could approach her. Elijah knew that Emily was somehow connected to the collectors, that she had been forced to do their bidding. He decided to find her, to offer her his help, and to uncover the truth about Finch and the collectors' plans. But as he searched for Emily, he stumbled upon a horrifying discovery. He found a hidden room beneath the gallery, a secret chamber filled with stolen artwork, priceless artifacts, and surveillance equipment. He realized that Finch was using the gallery as a front for his criminal activities, that he was a key player in the collectors' network. He also found evidence that Finch was planning to assassinate a prominent politician who was investigating the collectors' activities. Elijah knew that he had to stop Finch, to prevent the assassination and expose his crimes. But he was outnumbered and outgunned, and he had no one to turn to for help. He was facing a desperate situation, one that could cost him his life. But as he stood there, surrounded by stolen art and sinister secrets, Elijah knew that he couldn't back down. He had come too far to turn back now. The poisoned wood was a message, and so was Emily's presence in that gallery. Something big was about to go down. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Elijah, the lives of countless people hanging in the balance. He had to find a way to stop Arthur Finch's assassination plot and expose his connection to the collectors, all while evading the watchful eyes of a network that seemed to be everywhere. Time was running out. He decided to confide in Sarah Jenkins. Despite his initial reservations, he realized that he couldn't do this alone. Sarah was intelligent, resourceful, and fiercely loyal. He trusted her with his life. He shared his discovery with her, showing her the hidden room beneath the gallery and explaining Finch's plans. Sarah was shocked and horrified, but she didn't hesitate to offer her support. She agreed to help him gather evidence, track Finch's movements, and alert the authorities. Together, they devised a plan to infiltrate Finch's inner circle, to gain his trust and uncover his secrets. Sarah, with her artistic flair and her ability to charm anyone, would pose as a wealthy art buyer, eager to acquire Finch's prized possessions. Elijah, with his carpentry skills and his knowledge of construction, would pose as a handyman, offering to repair and maintain Finch's gallery. They knew that it was a risky plan, but they were determined to see it through. They started by researching Finch's background, learning everything they could about his life, his interests, and his associates. They discovered that Finch was obsessed with a rare and valuable diamond necklace that had once belonged to Marie Antoinette. The necklace was rumored to be cursed, bringing bad luck and misfortune to anyone who possessed it. Finch believed that the necklace would give him power and control, that it would make him invincible. Sarah, using her connections in the art world, learned that Finch was planning to display the necklace at a private party he was hosting at his mansion on the outskirts of Asheville. The party was invitation only, and it was expected to be attended by some of the most powerful and influential people in the region. Elijah and Sarah realized that this was their opportunity to strike, to expose Finch and prevent the assassination. They managed to secure invitations to the party, using Sarah's connections and Elijah's carpentry skills to gain access to Finch's inner circle. On the night of the party, they arrived at Finch's mansion, dressed to impress and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they stepped inside, they were greeted by a scene of opulent luxury and veiled menace. The mansion was filled with priceless artwork, antique furniture, and elegantly dressed guests. But beneath the surface of wealth and sophistication, Elijah sensed a dark undercurrent, a feeling of unease and paranoia. Finch greeted them warmly, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of suspicion and amusement. He introduced them to his associates, a group of shady characters with hidden agendas and dangerous secrets. As the party progressed, Sarah worked her charm, engaging Finch in conversation and subtly probing for information. Elijah, meanwhile, discreetly explored the mansion, searching for evidence of Finch's assassination plot. He discovered a hidden office, a secret command center filled with surveillance equipment, weapons, and coded messages. He realized that Finch was planning to use the party as a cover for his assassination attempt, that he was going to kill the politician while everyone was distracted by the music, the food, and the spectacle of the diamond necklace. Elijah knew that he had to act fast to stop Finch before it was too late, but as he was about to alert the authorities, he was confronted by Emily Carter. She looked terrified, her eyes pleading for help. She revealed that Finch had been holding her hostage, forcing her to create artwork for the collectors. She had been planning to escape, but she had been afraid of what Finch would do to her family. Elijah promised to help her, to protect her from Finch and the collectors, but as he was about to lead her to safety, they were ambushed by Finch's henchmen. A fierce fight erupted, bullets flying through the air. Elijah and Emily were outnumbered, but they fought bravely, using their skills and their wits to defend themselves. Sarah, witnessing the chaos, joined the fray, using her artistic talents to create distractions and disarm the henchmen. Together, they managed to escape the mansion, but they knew that Finch would be coming after them. The Marie Antoinette diamond necklace glimmered under the light. This was far from over. As Elijah, Sarah, and Emily fled into the night, they knew they were running out of time. Arthur Finch, enraged by their escape and the disruption of his plans, would stop at nothing to silence them. They needed to find a safe place to hide, to regroup, and to devise a plan to expose Finch's crimes. Sarah suggested that they seek refuge at her family's cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The cabin was secluded and well hidden, a place where they could lie low and gather their thoughts. They drove through the winding mountain roads, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They arrived at the cabin exhausted and shaken but grateful to be alive. They barricaded the doors and windows, preparing for a possible attack. As they settled in, Elijah noticed that Emily was still visibly shaken. He sat down next to her, offering her a comforting hand. He wanted to know more. She was afraid. She said that Finch had a network of spies and informants, that he knew everything that was going on in Asheville. She revealed that Finch had been planning the assassination for months, that he had been waiting for the right opportunity to strike. She also told them that Finch was obsessed with the Marie Antoinette diamond necklace, believing that it possessed magical powers. She said that Finch had stolen the necklace from a museum years ago, and that he had been using it to influence people and control events. Elijah realized that the necklace was the key to stopping Finch, that it was the source of his power and his influence. He decided that they needed to steal the necklace back to break Finch's hold on the community. But as they were planning their next move, they heard a noise outside. Finch's henchmen had found them. They surrounded the cabin, their guns drawn, ready to attack. Elijah, Sarah, and Emily knew that they were trapped. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and they had nowhere to run. They prepared for a final stand, determined to fight to the death. A fierce gun battle erupted, bullets tearing through the cabin walls. Elijah, Sarah, and Emily fought bravely, using their skills and their wits to defend themselves. They managed to hold off the henchmen for a while, but they knew that they couldn't last forever. As the battle raged, Elijah noticed that Emily was acting strangely. She seemed to be under some kind of trance, her eyes glazed over, her movements robotic. He realized that Finch had been using the diamond necklace to control her mind, that she was a puppet in his sinister game. He tried to snap her out of it, but she wouldn't respond. She turned on him, her eyes filled with hatred. She raised a gun, pointing it at his head. Elijah knew that he was about to die, that Emily was about to kill him. But then Sarah intervened. She tackled Emily, knocking the gun out of her hand. The two women wrestled on the floor, their struggle a desperate battle for survival. Elijah watched in horror, unsure of what to do. He knew that he had to stop them, but he didn't want to hurt Emily. As the fight continued, the cabin door burst open. Arthur Finch strode into the room, his eyes filled with rage. He was holding the Marie Antoinette diamond necklace, its jewels glinting in the dim light. He raised the necklace, pointing it at Elijah. He began to chant a strange incantation, his voice filled with power. Elijah felt a surge of energy coursing through his body, his mind spinning out of control. He knew that Finch was trying to control him, to turn him into a puppet like Emily. He struggled to resist, to maintain his free will, but Finch's power was too strong. He felt himself losing control, his mind slipping away. As he was about to succumb to Finch's influence, he heard a voice in his head. It was his mother, her voice filled with love and encouragement. She told him to be strong, to resist the darkness, to fight for what he believed in. Elijah found a surge of inner strength. He focused his mind, blocking out Finch's influence. He broke free from his control, his mind clear and focused. He stood up, facing Finch with newfound determination. He knew that he had to stop him, to break his power and save Emily. The Marie Antoinette diamond necklace, he believed, held the key to the past and the future. He prepared for one final battle, determined to defeat Finch and bring an end to his reign of terror. In a moment of clarity, Elijah understood that the Marie Antoinette diamond necklace was more than just a symbol of power and influence. It was a conduit for dark energy, a tool used to manipulate and control minds. The curse wasn't just a legend. It was a real force, amplified by Finch's twisted ambitions. He had to sever that connection, to destroy the necklace and break Finch's hold on Emily and the community. But Finch was ready. He lunged forward, wielding the necklace like a weapon, as the jewels pulsed with dark energy. Elijah dodged the attack, his carpentry instincts kicking in. He grabbed a nearby axe, its blade gleaming in the firelight. A fierce battle ensued, the two men locked in a desperate struggle for control. Elijah fought with all his strength and skill, but Finch was fueled by the necklace's power. He seemed to anticipate Elijah's every move, countering his attacks with ease. Sarah and Emily watched in horror, unable to intervene. They were both weakened and injured, vulnerable to Finch's sinister influence. As the battle raged, Elijah realized that he couldn't defeat Finch with brute force. He needed to find a way to disrupt the necklace's energy, to break its connection to Finch's mind. He remembered a story his grandfather had told him, a legend about a sacred wood that could neutralize dark energy. The wood was said to grow only in the highest peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains, guarded by ancient spirits. Elijah knew that it was a long shot, but he had nothing to lose. He feigned a retreat, luring Finch out of the cabin and into the forest. He led him through the dense trees, scrambling over rocks and dodging branches. Finch pursued him relentlessly, his eyes burning with rage. As they reached a clearing, Elijah spotted a gnarled old tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like twisted fingers. He recognized it as the sacred wood from his grandfather's story. He made a desperate lunge for the tree, grabbing a branch and snapping it off. Finch lunged for Elijah, but he was too late. Elijah raised the branch, channeling his energy into the wood. The branch began to glow with a warm, golden light, radiating peace and tranquility. He swung the branch at the diamond necklace, striking it with all his might. The necklace shattered into a million pieces, its dark energy dissipating into the air. Finch screamed in agony, his body convulsing. The connection to the necklace was broken, his power stripped away. He collapsed to the ground, his mind reeling. Emily, freed from Finch's control, snapped out of her trance. She looked around in confusion, her eyes filled with tears. Sarah rushed to her side, comforting her and reassuring her that everything was going to be all right. Elijah stood over Finch, his heart filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. He knew that Finch was a broken man, his dreams shattered, his power gone. He decided to spare his life, to let him face the consequences of his actions. He turned to Sarah and Emily, offering them a reassuring smile. The battle was over, the darkness had been vanquished. The peace was broken. The darkness, it seemed, was now after him. The aftermath of the confrontation at the cabin left a lingering unease in Elijah's soul. Arthur Finch was taken into custody, his criminal empire dismantled, but the knowledge that such darkness could exist in his peaceful mountain community was deeply unsettling. Emily Carter, traumatized by her experience, received counseling and began to rebuild her life. Sarah Jenkins, ever the supportive partner, remained by Elijah's side, her love and strength a constant source of comfort. But Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched, that the tendrils of the collector's influence extended far beyond what they had uncovered. He started experiencing vivid nightmares, haunted by images of shadowy figures and cryptic symbols. He became withdrawn and paranoid, questioning the motives of everyone around him. He started seeing a therapist in Asheville. Dr. Eleanor Vance was kind and professional, with a good reputation around town. She was also the next pawn in the darkness's plan. One evening, while working late in his workshop, Elijah received an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted and menacing. "You think you've won," the voice hissed, "but you have only scratched the surface. The collectors are eternal and their reach is infinite. You will never be safe." Elijah slammed the phone down, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this wasn't just an empty threat. The collectors were still out there, and they were determined to make him pay for interfering with their plans. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Jack Stratton, to look into the collector's remaining assets and associates. Jack was a tough and cynical man, but he was also honest and reliable. He agreed to help Elijah, warning him that this could be a dangerous undertaking. Together, they began to investigate, following a trail of cryptic clues that led them across the country and into the heart of a shadowy underworld. They discovered that the collectors had been laundering money through a network of offshore accounts, using shell corporations to conceal their illegal activities. They also learned that the collectors had been funding a radical political group that was planning to launch a series of terrorist attacks across the United States. Elijah realized that he had stumbled upon something far bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He was no longer just fighting for his own safety. He was fighting to protect his country from a devastating attack. He decided to alert the authorities, but he knew that he couldn't trust anyone. He had to find a way to get the information to the right people without exposing himself to danger. He contacted Abigail Hayes, his trusted lawyer, and explained the situation to her. Abigail agreed to help, using her connections in the government to pass on the information to the appropriate agencies. The authorities launched a massive investigation, uncovering the collectors' network of offshore accounts and their ties to the radical political group. They managed to thwart the terrorist attacks, saving countless lives. The collectors were finally brought to justice, their organization dismantled, their assets seized. Elijah was hailed as a hero, but he refused to take credit for the victory. He knew that he had simply done what was right, that he had acted in the best interests of his community and his country. But as the dust settled, Elijah received another anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was chillingly familiar. "You may have won this battle," the voice said, "but the war is far from over. We will be back and we will have our revenge." Elijah hung up the phone, his heart sinking. He knew that the collectors were not truly defeated, that they would continue to operate in the shadows, plotting their revenge. He realized that he would never be truly safe, that he would always have to be vigilant, protecting himself and his loved ones from the forces of darkness. He decided to dedicate his life to fighting against injustice, to helping those who were victimized by the powerful and the corrupt. He became an advocate for peace, a champion for the voiceless, a beacon of hope in a world filled with darkness. He realized that true revenge wasn't about inflicting pain on others, but about creating a better world for everyone. And as he looked out at the mountains of Asheville, he knew that he had finally found his purpose. His mother knew a thing or two. He realized that Abigail Hayes was still working but had also changed as a person. He wondered why. Elijah's newfound purpose brought a sense of fulfillment to his life, but the lingering threat of the collectors cast a long shadow over his peace. He became increasingly involved in local community initiatives, using his carpentry skills to build homes for the less fortunate and his voice to advocate for social justice. He found solace in his work, transforming raw materials into something beautiful and functional, a metaphor for his own journey of healing and transformation. One day, while volunteering at a homeless shelter, Elijah met a young woman named Maria, a former art student who had fallen on hard times. Maria was talented and passionate, but she had been exploited by a corrupt gallery owner who had stolen her artwork and left her destitute. Elijah saw a kindred spirit in Maria, someone who had been victimized by the same forces of greed and exploitation that had driven the collectors. He decided to help her, offering her a job in his workshop and mentoring her in the art of carpentry. Maria proved to be a quick learner, and she soon became an invaluable member of his team. She also became a close friend, someone he could confide in and trust. As Elijah worked with Maria, he began to notice that she possessed a unique artistic talent, a gift for creating sculptures that seemed to capture the essence of the human spirit. He encouraged her to pursue her art, providing her with the materials and the space she needed to create. Maria's sculptures began to attract attention, and she soon gained a reputation as a rising star in the art world. Her work was displayed in local galleries, and she began to receive commissions from wealthy collectors. Elijah was proud of Maria's success, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He noticed that she was becoming increasingly secretive, that she was spending long hours working alone in her studio. He also noticed that she was receiving strange phone calls, that she was meeting with shady characters in dark alleys. He feared that she was being drawn back into the world of exploitation and deceit, that she was becoming a pawn in someone else's game. He decided to confront her, to offer her his help and protection. But as he approached her studio, he heard voices inside. He cautiously opened the door, peering inside. He saw Maria standing in front of a group of men, their faces hidden in shadow. They were wearing expensive suits and jewelry, and they were speaking in hushed tones. As Elijah listened, he realized that they were members of the Collectors, that they had recruited Maria to create artwork for them. They were planning to use her sculptures to smuggle illegal goods across international borders, exploiting her talent for their own nefarious purposes. Elijah was enraged. He stormed into the studio, confronting the Collectors and demanding that they leave Maria alone. The Collectors turned on him, their faces filled with malice. They threatened him, warning him that he was interfering with their plans. They told him that they had been watching him, that they knew everything about his life, his friends, and his family. They told him that they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with menace. Elijah knew that he was outmatched, but he refused to back down. He was determined to protect Maria, to prevent her from becoming a victim of the Collector's greed and exploitation. He had learned to know who to trust, but as he stood there, facing the forces of darkness, he realized that he was about to make a fateful decision, one that could change the course of his life forever. The darkness was closing in again. Elijah, standing defiant in Maria's studio, knew he was facing a formidable enemy. The Collectors, though weakened, were far from defeated. They were like a hydra, their heads multiplying with each one he severed. He had to protect Maria not just from their immediate threat but from the long-term consequences of their influence. "Leave her alone," Elijah said, his voice firm despite the tremor of fear in his heart. "She's done nothing wrong. Take your business elsewhere." The Collectors sneered, their eyes glinting with amusement. "You think you can stop us, Thorn?" Their leader, a tall, imposing man with a silver tongue, said, "We are everywhere. We own everything. You are nothing but an obstacle, a fly to be swatted." Elijah refused to be intimidated. He knew that words were useless against these people. He had to act. He grabbed a nearby hammer, his carpentry instincts kicking in. He charged at the Collectors, swinging the hammer with all his might. The Collectors were caught off guard, but they quickly recovered. They pulled out guns, pointing them at Elijah. Maria screamed, begging them to stop, but the Collectors were relentless. They opened fire, bullets whizzing through the air. Elijah ducked and weaved, dodging the bullets with surprising agility. He managed to knock one of the Collectors to the ground, disarming him. He grabbed the gun and turned it on the others. A fierce gun battle ensued, the studio filled with the sounds of gunfire and shattering glass. Elijah fought bravely, using his skills and his wits to defend himself and Maria. He managed to wound several of the Collectors, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. He knew that he couldn't last forever. As the battle raged, Maria saw an opportunity to escape. She grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it in the faces of the Collectors, creating a cloud of confusion. She then grabbed Elijah's hand and pulled him out of the studio. They